What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here today. Today we're gonna do Blue Wave with Valeos. So one of the things that I like about Valeos is that you are able to do an effective first strike turn with Flood Hazard. And so for those that don't know, basically Flood Hazard is a restanding first strike turn, essentially. So the stride has the skills that basically when your rear guard with Blue Wave in the name makes an attack on the fourth battle, at the end you can actually counterblast, Persona Flip, discard 2, and then get minus drive 3 and then restand it. And so the first attack you'll get normal triple drive, and then the second attack will have 0 drive. So you just have to be worried about that, but you actually get a second Vanguard attack, and so that provides a lot of value. And so one of the cool things that I like about Valeos, specifically with this stride, is that when you stride a stride with the original name in Blue Wave in it, you can actually Soul Blast a unit with the Blue Wave name, and you can lock your opponent's Vanguard at 11k. And so any damage check triggers do not work on them. So basically, anything that you have 11k, rearguard, or even your Vanguard that is over is going to take at least one card, or they're going to take a damage. And so it really puts them in a position where basically they take a damage or they're losing a guard at least. So it's a phenomenal card, actually. And so optimizing this first strike turn is key, because the discard 2 does hurt. So we are minusing 2, and there are other cards in the deck that can help mitigate that. And at the same time, just kind of go from there. So let's get right into it. On to the grade 3s. So we are playing 10 grade 3s in this lineup. I'm actually playing 11 cards in total to pitch the stride, for the cost of stride, basically. So I do have one Nick in the grade 1s. Our main boy is actually Valeos. And so, again, with Valeos, this goes when you stride onto him with a Blue Wave Vanguard with the original name. You can Soul Blast Blue Wave, lock your opponent 11k, which is phenomenal. His other skill is basically at the beginning of your ride phase. So this is not when you ride. This is like he's already a Vanguard and it comes back to you. You can counterblast 1, call a Blue Wave unit from your hand to rearguard circle. It gets +2 to the end of turn, and then you may draw a card. So it's one way to actually use a counterblast to basically give you a draw. So cards that you're going to put on the board like Valeos and other restanders such as like Fleet Dragon, which segues into Fleet Dragon. So Arsenal Fleet actually has 2 uses, and both of its skills are very valuable. So the first skill is a little more restrictive. It is a GB1 Counterblast, a Blue Wave in its card name, so that is a special Counterblast. And so when this unit attacks, and if it's basically the second battle of this turn, it gets +4 and stand this unit. So it's a restandard that becomes a 15k. It's useful to help you to get to the 4th battle, so you could actually meet the criteria for Flood Hazard, especially on first stride. Flood Hazard requires a Blue Wave unit. And so having rearguards that have Blue Wave unit are just very helpful. And I felt Arsenal Fleet can help with that spot in particular. And at the same time, since it becomes a 15k attacker that restands, you could have a booster like an 8k and it becomes 23. So if you are not able to do Valeos' skill, you can still hit magic numbers such as 23. And then if you have a 7k booster, 22. So the second skill is honestly the use most often that I've noticed when I was playtesting. So as a drop zone skill, so you can Soul Blast any card, which is key. When your Vanguard with Blue Wave in its name actually stands due to the effect of your card, then you may pay the cost and actually just return this card from the drop zone to your hand. So basically when you pay the cost of stride to the cost to restand, you can even pitch him and he'll bid the drop zone, then your stride restands, then you can use the skill Soul Blast and return it back. So it helps mitigate that -2 that I was talking about earlier, and so that helps a ton. Even though he's a grade 3 and his shield value is kind of, 0 basically, you can still use him for Stride Fighter next turn, you can use him as a rearguard next turn, or best yet, you can use him as the cost for a PG. So that way you can keep your other combo pieces like Valeos and Tidal Assault and so on. And so it really plays in that role for the most part. It helps mitigate that cost, becoming a -2 to a -1 to potentially net even, and if you're lucky, +1. So Riptide and Favas. So these are more of I guess the text, but they're all purposely for the basically rearguard placement. And so Valeos is your main Vanguard that you want to go into. All these other guys are your rearguards that you can play with if you do have the option to and you want to go into them. Riptide is a beater, so he can only attack on the 4th battle or more. So what I like to do with him is that I have a Wheel Assault in the lineup, so I can swap a unit in front of Wheel Assault as the first attack to bring back a Riptide from the back row into the front row and actually be available after your second Vanguard attack. So that way your second Vanguard attack, if you do have a drive check, Eventually, Flood Hazard can have one drive check on his second attack, and then Tetra Boil is twin drive. So you could actually put those triggers on a standing rearguard still. So that way you can get the most value, right? And at the same time, he becomes a 32k beater. So even if you didn't hit triggers, he can still hit, especially if you did the 11k mark. So that's going to really force more shield. It's actually going to force 25k shield because you lock him at 11 and he's 32. So really good numbers. I do have a Coral Assault in the grade 2 lineup. I was playing around those numbers because I do have some other grade 2s that serve different purposes. And so I did a split between 2 Riptide and 2 Coral Assault, and you'll see what I mean once I go into the grade 2s. But Riptide is really nice because he doesn't require any other rear guards to actually get the 32k or become 32k. He just needs to be the 4th battle or more, and he attacks and boom, beater. So really good. And then lastly, Supreme Ruler of the Storm Fava. So this card, there is a Baragios Retrain. Thank you for the Team Dragons Vanity set. Baragios is phenomenal. He's a grade 1 that basically on-plays. Check the top 5 for a grade 3, and if you do, you can add it, and then you can discard 1 card. There is another card, which is the Stride Fighter Nikki, that could actually search for Fava specifically. So I wanted another grade 3, per se, to be searchable, besides outside of Baragios. And with that, if I wanted to call a Nikki to field to search for the Thawas to have a restandard, then that works. Sometimes you may not have the right setup, and sometimes that helps with that regard. He also basically, you can write him as Vanguard. So if you're facing a certain matchup where he is the play to actually ride onto and then fall back to your generic strides like Alexandros, Megiddo, Valeos stride, and so on, you can fall back into him. Flood Hazard actually has a GB3 skill where he gets an extra drive check, and it's generic. It doesn't require the Blue Wave Heart. His restanding skill, it does. So if you have Favas as Vanguard and you stride into Flood Hazard and you have GB3 live, you have quad check, and then you can use his skill to basically choose one of your cards, call it to regard like Fuevos, give it resist, so that way Denial Griffin and other cards that can retire on your turn don't have any effect on it. And then with the quad check, you can stack triggers on the Fuevos and really get the benefit on your 3rd and 4th battles with potentially trigger stack onto it. So that helps in those matchups too. Does it come up often? Not really, but it is there. And if you want, you can switch it for a different grade 3. You can up Arsenal Fleet, you can up Riptides, or just play a different lineup. So it's really up to you. And another note that I wanted to do with Arsenal Fleet that I just remembered is the Baragios. So what's nice about Arsenal Fleet is if he's already in the drop zone, the better. With Baragios, he lets you check the top 5 at a grade 3 in discard card. I literally just sometimes filter for him, and I just discard it immediately, or maybe I just need a Valeos, and then discard this card if I already have it in hand. So that way, it actually synergizes really well with the new stuff as well. So Arsenal Fleet becomes a little more valuable and easier to pull off at that respect. Onto the grade 2. So we are playing the 4 Fuevos. Fuevos is a staple for Blue Wave since G-Era, essentially since the Clan Booster. And what he does is that 3rd wave time only, when he attacks Vanguard, you can counterblast 1. He gets 2k for the turn, and at the end of the battle, stand it. So he's basically your 3rd battle restander for Blue Wave. And he's not GB locked, so you can actually use it in the early game. As soon as your Vanguard has Blue Wave in the name, then you can use it. And then at this point in time, is basically your grade 2 turn and up. So a really good card. Honestly, we still rely on it, especially with the attack patterns that we do with Flood Hazard or Tetra Boil. It just synergizes well with the deck, and because he becomes 11k, Valeos' 11k lock just synergizes really well, and it's a 1-card restander that can force a card or damage to your opponent in that respect too. So yeah, and we're also playing the Tidal Assault up here. He is the V version. So what did I notice with this deck is that ultimately Fuevos is the main guy that gets you there to get to the 4th battle and actually proc your Vanguard's restanding skill. So your other regards can either be swapped like Coral Assault for a big beater, or just contribute to a first attack that does something. And so Tidal Assault, really when he attacks for the first time, you can Soul Blast 1, restand it, and he does not get the minus 5k. That only happens on wave 2nd or more. And so honestly, using the V Tidal version instead of the OG worked out in this version of the deck. So honestly, I've been relying on this card. It also gives you another card to actually have a good early game too. So I'll piggyback off Coral Assault. Basically, Coral Assault is that when you have 4 or more units besides itself that are rested, even the Vanguard's included, it gets 15k. And then at the end of the turn, the total number attacks of this turn was 4 or more, you can put it into Assault and draw a card. And so you can have 4 attacks with Title V in the early game with Coral Assault and get that benefit of actually just putting it into Assault and actually drawing a card, which pays cost for the Title Assault going off. You net 0 in the Soul at that point because you took it away and then you plus it. Because you want to save the Soul for Valeos' skill as well in Arsenal Fleet. So Soul Blasting can be a little heavy, so just be wary of that too. And Coral Assault, again, he would just be a beater that you can swap with the Wheel Assault. And in the early game, you can do some combos that, like I said, you can have 4 attacks, or you could just have it as a big beater and just abuse that really as well. And so, which ends up to the Hapolis over here, the Tier Knight. I realized that he came as a promo. I thought he actually came in the set, and so I thought I had a playset already. But I did not. I just had the one, and so I was actually playtesting this deck a lot. Well, most of the time actually on CFA, and I just realized today that I just only had the one copy. So that's why there's like the blank cards behind it. I'm actually playing 3 Hapolis in the card profile, in the deck profile. And so what does he even do? His skill is actually when your Vanguard attacks, you can retire this unit and one of your Vanguards gets 10k until the end of the turn. And at the end of that battle, if the attack hit, you draw a card. So a couple of things that go through people's minds. So basically, if your Vanguard hits, not only that, your Vanguard gets power up for until the end of the turn. So your Restanding Stride gets a plus 10k for both its attacks, which is really good. The end of the battle, if it attack hit, draw a card. You can draw a card. I was playing it that basically the battle that I use it for, it only gets that time to, if it hits, it draws a card. I don't think it's like a permanent gain till the end of the turn. So just keep in mind that. I wish it went into Soul, but it retires itself, so whatever. And honestly, this card is in the V series, so it's not GB restricted. And so you can use this as early as grade 2. So sometimes if you do have a blue wave, so if you have double Fuevos and Hapolis, so you can do Ride of Fuevos, call the other Fuevos, call this, attack with this first, then attack with the Vanguard, use the skill, make the Vanguard 19k, and then if it hits, it draw a card, and then you can stack all the triggers onto the Fuevos. That is a rearguard style, so you can get 4 battles that way, making your Vanguard a little more threatening, and you more than likely can actually hit and get a draw. Most of the time, people actually just let the Vanguard hit, or if they can block it if it's small enough, then they throw like a 15k trigger or a 20k trigger to stop it, essentially. And then the same thing when you grade 3 turn. Valeos, when you ride up to grade 3, he does nothing. So Fuevos helps with that, with making 4 attacks happen. But if you open up again with one of this and one of this as rearguards and you're on Valeos, you can make Valeos 21k. And Twin Drive, which can more than likely hit a trigger. So depending on what your opponent wants to guard with or let it pass, you're more likely to actually hit, get your drawback, and then any triggers on Fuevos. And so what's nice is that you're able to call another card to actually get your 4 battles off. And at the end of the turn, this cleans itself up and you get a card back potentially. Before you would have a front row filled up with a card on the left and Fuevos on the right, and then your Vanguard. And so they can attack both your rearguards, deny you counterblast, and you're just kind of in this crap position, basically. So Hapolis has those benefits, and then, of course, you can go into the stride turns. One interaction that I've done before is that you can boost him with a Wheel Assault on the first battle, swap him with a Coral Assault or a Riptide, and then when the Vanguard attacks, he will just pop himself, make the Vanguard threatening to make your turn even better. And if you get a drawback, even better. And you set up your field pretty well, especially with a Riptide. So, yep. Quick grade 2 honorable mentions. In the G era, we get a good number of Blue Wave grade 2s that have served different purposes throughout the sets. Honestly, I was thinking about these guys, but I honestly, some of these are not as great as anymore. A good example, Daimia was really good in the Anger Boil build back in the day. When she came out, basically you can Soul Blast, give herself and 2 other units that basically they get 2k until the end of the turn. And so with the Anger Boil interaction, you can give +3 to the Vanguard and to other 2 rearguards. And so that 2k help basically making 2 + 3, making a 5k total boost, making Fuevos like a 16k booster by his own. Your Vanguard hits the magic number 31 at the time, so it just helped the deck synergize well. And again, it had the Blue Wave name. The 2k plus in this day of age is not really that great, so I really didn't even try to play test with her anymore. Metla is a great card for resist. She is an 8k base though, so it's kind of annoying. She is GB1 restricted as well, So if you have a Vanguard with Blue Wave in the name, this can attack from the back row, which is nice. And if it does, it becomes an 11k when it attacks the Vanguard. So it becomes 11k poke to the Vanguard from the back row, and it has resist, which could be good, and especially those matchups where if you're afraid of a Denial Griffin, Metla is not gonna die by Denial Griffin, basically, which helps with your play if you right Thalas, give something else resist, and now you have 2 rearguards that have resist, basically, and work from there. She might be worth trying. You can take out the Hapolis for her. That's something that I recommend. We have the original Valeos, which brings me back to the Valeos and Valeos in the new set. They are locked behind the grade 3 requirement. They don't say grade 3 or greater, so you're already shit out of luck for those stride turns. And they have an additional clause where the opponent's Vanguard has to be a different power, which is fine with Valeos because most of them are using Vanguards that are in the 12k or the 13k base, so making them 11k meets that requirement. But again, if you're striding, you're crap out of luck, basically. So the original Valeos, it's GB1 locked, you can counterblast, discard a Blue Wave, so that's already a special discard, basically. And if this unit attacks and you have a Vanguard with Blue Wave in the original card name, so you have to have a stride that has the original Blue Wave name, which is not a problem with the Blue Wave strides, but you can't do like on Xandros on Valeos kind of thing. So that's also wary. And it's once per turn that when your Vanguard attacks, stand this unit, and then if it's the first battle, stand this unit. So you can get 3 attacks with this guy, which is really nice, but you got a Counterblast and then a special discard, which is not as great because you're discarding on top of that, and then at the same time you have to have the Blue Wave. And most of the Blue Wave cards that we play are actually cards that we want to use on the field. So yeah. And then lastly, Lucianos. He is basically a card that is a special counterblast. And then basically if you have a grade 3 or Vanguard or greater, it gets 2k and the ability to restand at the end of the second battle. So it's another restander. Your attack patterns can be easily mitigated. The Vanguard strides on stride turns don't care about the number, not the number, but the wave that they attack. That was only with the Anger Boil stride skill. Valeos and the strides themselves don't care. So you can use Valeos as another restander, so that could be another potential guy to use. So yeah. And if you guys hear the wind in the background, it's really windy today. So yeah. But anyway, it must be the wind. You know, the wind tells me things. On to the great ones. We're playing 4 Barragios of the new one from the new set. He is phenomenal. Again, he is basically on plays Vanguard or Rearguard. Check the top 5. You can reveal grade 3, add it to your hand, and if you do, you discard, which is great for Arsenal Fleet, great for getting Valeos, great for getting Riptide, great for getting Rule of Havas, just phenomenal card. And it also has the Blue Wave name, so if you ride into him, you have another Blue Wave to work with Valeos' skill, which is phenomenal. It's really useful, especially if you need to use it more than once. And then the other skill is basically Vanguard Rearguard as well. During your turn, if you have 4 or more rested rearguards, this gets +5. So if it's one of the last attacking units, it becomes a 13k that can attack. Again, 11k locked opponent, you can actually hit that. Or it can boost for a 13k booster, which is really good. And also, if you do boost like on the 4th battle with the Valeos is 11k normally, and then with a 13k boost, that becomes 24k. So if you didn't use Valeos' skill, that makes 24k, which hits even worse Vanguards at that point if they hit a damage check trigger, basically. So that's nice, actually. And then we'll go into our boy Wheel Assault. So Wheel Assault, at the end of the battle, it boosted, choose 2 your rearguards, and swap them. So that's what I was talking about earlier, where you can swap into Riptides, Coral Assaults, just to have those rearguards available to attack after the second Vanguard attack. Very useful. At the same time, cards that you can use. A good example is the Premium Collection Crit Trigger. That basically goes into Soul when your Vanguard attacks. So if you boost that with the crit trigger, that's a 12k line, which hits the Vanguard. Swap it with a unit that you care. And then when your Vanguard attacks, the crit goes into Soul, and you get advantage back, and it gets power too. So it synergizes really well. The second skill is basically when Road a Pawn. So when you ride into grade 2, you can counterblast, draw a card, and then call something. So you have availability access to use the Riptide play, so you can actually call a Riptide early on. And if you have a Tidal Assault V, you can just get those 4 attacks and just hit hard. And actually get some advantage at the same time. So you have that option to use. So that's there, but most of the time it's not used, especially with the stack. You really need a moderator in your counterblast, which segues into the Light Signals Penguin Soldier from the V series. You rest this unit, and one of the units in the same column gets +5k until the end of the turn. Great for restanders like Valeos, Tidal Assault, and so on. even your Vanguard if you really need to. But the second skill is really what he's there for, is basically when your unit attacks, if it's the fourth battle of that turn, you can retire it and countercharge. So what's really cool about Flood Hazard, you could theoretically do it in one counterblast that turn. So if you have one open counterblast, you can use a restanding skill like Huevos because he activates on the third wave. And then with Penguin Soldier, as soon as you get your fourth attack going, you retire countercharge. And then at the end of the battle for the fourth battle, you can use Flood Hazard's counterblast skill to pay the cost and do his thing. So you could actually do that with one counterblast. Or if you didn't have some, and then you can mitigate like with the title V. That helps in that regard too. So I just wanted a card to help with some kind of countercharging. We have Gaphilia in the G zone, so that helps with the G guard basically. So this kind of helps with that. And then in the early game, if it makes to need to apply some pressure, like especially against force clans, if they're at a 10k and you're 9k and you have a title or a Fuevos, well, mainly title, you can give the title power so it could hit over the 10k. That doesn't come up as often, but it is available. And then, of course, we have Nikki. Nikki, like I said, he's just another card that I could pitch to Stride. The 11 cards to pitch to Stride is just something that's worked for me over the years. And again, you can place them, search for Thavas, discard any other card, and then just use Thavas if you really need to at that point. So, yeah. On to the grade zeros. So, phenomenally, we got a good starter. Even though it's a basic on-ride draw card, it is Costi. And he has Blue Wave in the name, which is phenomenal. Because that way you can guarantee a Blue Wave in the soul. So your first Stride with Valeos always goes off, which is great. Because Forerunners before would actually have the Forerunner skill come out of the soul and actually come into regards. And now you have to figure out how to get a Blue Wave into the soul, whether you ride up with a grade 1 or grade 2 or something that soul charges basically. But this just makes it a lot easier, lets you focus on other things. And sometimes, honestly, you just need that first Stride 11k lock to go off, and that's it. So it puts you in a really good spot on first Stride, so you can actually do Flood Hazard very consistently. And so outside of that, we have the trigger lineup, which is the 8 crit, 4 heal, and the 4 draw. The heals are also V-Series, so we don't care about the Blue Wave name as much. So we appreciate the V-Series power-ups, the 10k and the 20k shield, and then we have the draw PGs in the triggers now, so we have more room in the grade 1 slots. And then we have our triggers. The premium collection is a 10k and a 15k shield one. And GB1, if your Vanguard attacks, put this into your soul, draw a card, and your Vanguard gets 10k to the end of the battle. It's not to the end of the turn, so you can only get that 10k for one of the battles if you're restanding that turn. But it's another card that you can plop down, do a certain number of attacks, put it into soul, draw one card, and then make your Vanguard even better, threatening. Great with for Wheel Assault. It's a unit that you can plop down to get your fourth battle requirement if you really needed to, and still get the advantage back at that point. And then following up is Brutal Trooper, right here on the right. He is the Blue Wave crit from the Clan Booster back in the day. He is basically put into the top of your deck, and if you have a Vanguard with Blue Wave, choose up to one of your Vanguards, and it gets the Red Tech skill, basically Wave second or more. When this unit attacks Vanguard, you can draw a card, and then of course you shuffle your deck. So you actually just don't need, you can pay the cost if you didn't have a Blue Wave Vanguard just to get a crit back into deck. So that's one of the purposes he does. He's a crit that goes back into the deck. So you're playing a crit, it seems like you're playing more crit, so that helps a lot. And at the same time, you may choose up to 1. So if you're decking out, you can choose 0, so you don't have to worry about that. And then the Red Tech skill is where you actually want to actually start plussing. So for every Brutal Trooper on a restanding turn, you plus 1, essentially. And because of that, it helps mitigate the -2 that you're getting from Flood Hazard on first Stride. So if you open this and on Arsenal Fleet, you break even. Or if you play any combination, or you even drive check a draw PG, you break even, or just, it helps mitigate that minus, essentially. And so that's why I want to play 4 of this, because I actually want to see it on my first Stride turn. If I have it in my hand, I can plop it down, return it back to deck, and I'm good to go, essentially. And honestly, it's very helpful. And then once you start getting to like GB2 for like Tetra Boil, and then GB3 for Flood Hazard, you start plussing. So it's really good to keep you in the game and be aggressive and do your thing. So yeah. Onto the Strides. We are playing 4 Flood Hazard and 2 Tetra Boil. So Flood Hazard, again, restanding skill. The GB3, like I mentioned, he gets plus drive 1, and it doesn't matter what the heart is, and then all of your rearguards that have Blue Wave in the front row get plus 2k, so it can mean a difference, especially if you're boosting with certain numbers, you can hit different thresholds, so that can come up. But honestly, it's just a solid card. Definitely play 4 in the Valeos build. He's just very abusable. and he's just very beneficial, especially if you're not on a blue wave Vanguard, because you can still have access to quad check. That doesn't come up as often. You could always fall back to Valeos, Alexandros, and all those other cards, but it is there as an option. Like I mentioned with Valeos, you can have resist, you can have the blue wave name, so you can use cards like Valeos, the Arsenal Fleet, and so on, and just go from there. We have Tetra Boyle. He is the re-standard that started in blue wave for strides. In the clan booster, GB2, when this unit attacks, you can counterblast 1 persona flip. He gets the red tech skill, wave 4 time only. And so at the end of the battle that your rearguard attack Vanguard, you may discard 1 card and stand it. He does not care if the rearguard is blue wave. He only cares that it attacks Vanguard. And he goes twin drive basically for both attacks. And so that's super helpful. And it's GB2, so it's a stride that if you end up going to grade 3 first and then you G-guard, you definitely go into Tetra Boyle rather than Flood Hazard, because you will still -1 due to the extra drive being locked behind GB3. So go with Tetra Boyle, very solid card too. Discard 1, and with 4 drive checks in total, actually breaks even on its own. So if you use Brutal Trooper, Arsenal Fleet, draw triggers, you start plussing at that point. So you can still fall back to it. But after, like, once you get later with GB3, you definitely fall into Flood Hazard, because you get 4 checks, then 1 check, so that's 5 drive checks in total. So you get more drive checks at that point. We also have our fallback strikes with Alexandros and Valeos. Alexandros, second or third, at the end of the battle, counterblast, restand. Your rearguards get plus 5k for every unit in the G zone. So he's a fallback stride, especially if you can use him on first stride. Valeos as well. When he attacks, counterblast 1, flip anything in the G zone. Call up to the number of 2 times per face-up card in the G zone, and you get to basically draw for each of them. And then if it's basically GB2 or more, your opponent gets 11k locked at that point. So it synergizes well. Oddly enough, he doesn't have the blue wave name, but he still has that effect, which can be useful at that point. And it helps to mitigate games, especially where if you're facing Nubatama, you can just have a field and hand at the same time. So when they do their plays, you're not as hurt as much. And then, of course, we have the Dragon Strides, which is Megiddo, and the Ballerina. And Megiddo's Megiddo, Ultimate Stride. It's a deck that you can use it, especially if you're falling behind, just Ultimate Stride. And then Ballerina, you can first stride it if they deny your counterblast for whatever reason, and then after that, you can get free strides, which is helpful. And then, of course, you have the discard card that's grade lesser 1. You can actually retire that Guardian and kind of do some damage at that point. But the main focus is honestly Flood Hazard and Tetra Boyle, so definitely abuse those cards as possible. Lastly, the G-Guards. We're playing Gafila, 2 of them. She's a great card just to flip generically with Alexandros, Valeos, and so on. And then basically her skill from the G-Zone, you can Soul Blast and either countercharge or unlock a unit. And it's very helpful if you really need the countercharge, so you can still fall back to a Tetra Boyle if you're GB2 or back to GB2 at that point. Or if you're still GB3, then you can fall back to a Flood Hazard at that point. So it actually works out really well. The farther you go into the game, it doesn't matter. It's not like Alexandros where you rely on the number of cards that are face up in the G zone. So that works. And Ionis, great card because you have somewhat of a field. So you can just counterblast 1 and then actually get 5k for a regard, and they get resist. They cannot be hit. And you can flip something like Gafila to get your counterblast back, essentially. And then Ice Barrier is basically plus 10k extra if it's a first or 4th battle or more. So again, these are basically our go-to G-Guards for Aqua Force. So Gafila does help a lot more than other builds because we do rely on countercharging if possible. And you just really want to moderate your counterblast. If you can 2 for turn, sometimes you can get away with 1, but sometimes you may have to do 3. It just keep that in mind. And that's the deck profile, guys, for Blue Wave Valeos. Honestly, it's a fun deck to play with. This is more of a casual build. I actually played on CFA a couple games. Well, recorded a couple games and uploaded to YouTube, so you can check one of the videos. It's been a little bit over 2 months from now, so the profile was meant to come out sooner than later, but it's better late than never, right? So honestly, this deck is pretty fun. With Valeos and Flood Hazard just doing things with the do, it's really cool, honestly. And so even some decks that get triggers on their damage checks, or if you're facing Gabriel like I did in CFA. It actually puts in work at that point. But again, it's a casual build, so change up the lineup that way you want it to your liking and have fun. If you like the video, give it a like, comment down below, share, and subscribe. See ya, amigos. Bye.